The Gala glowed like a promise. Glass walls, gold uplighting, a skyline so close it felt almost choreographed. The glass house was packed with executives and their curated laughter. Every conversation pitched just high enough to sound important. Maya Ellison stood near the bar, fingers tracing condensation on her champagne flute, her reflection caught between chandeliers and the city beyond. She had helped build the algorithm that funded this entire spectacle. But tonight, she was listed only as guest +1. The joke came from someone behind her, an operations manager whose name she never remembered. "You're Daniel's wife, right? You're practically invisible at these things." It was meant to be light, but the table erupted with the kind of laughter that turns truth into amusement. Invisible. The word stayed, hovering above the glitter and ice, more accurate than any data set she'd modeled that year. Daniel appeared a few minutes later, sleeves rolled to just the right angle, charm calibrated for visibility. He pressed a hand to the small of her back, the practiced gesture of a husband in photographs. "Having fun?" he asked, eyes scanning the crowd, already elsewhere. She smiled the way women do when the question isn't really a question. "Of course." Across the room, Camille Rhodes, Helix North's director of communications, was laughing with a group of investors. Her dress was liquid silver, catching every light like approval. When she turned, her gaze met Daniel's. It wasn't overt, just a flicker that knew too much. A microsecond, enough to confirm what Maya's intuition had been whispering since spring. Shared secrets travel by glance, not message. A senior VP took the stage to announce quarterly triumphs, slides glittering behind him. Maya recognized the deck immediately. Her slides, the same visual models she'd built in August. Only now her name was gone from the corner where it had once lived. The graphs were presented under Camille's department, Data Insights by Communications. The applause thundered, drowning out whatever faint protest rose in Maya's throat. She felt it in her chest like static, that odd detachment when the body continues smiling long after the mind has walked away. Daniel leaned close, whispering something about optics, about being gracious. His breath carried the sweetness of bourbon and the chill of detachment. Maya wanted to ask if he'd known, if he'd warned Camille, if this was the trade, the code for favor, the silence for access. Instead, she clinked glasses with someone she didn't know, her reflection refracted in the stemware like a ghost caught between angles. Later, as a live band began a cover of Dreams, couples filled the dance floor under suspended orbs of light. Maya stood at the edge, watching the movement of expensive fabrics and manicured hands. Daniel was dancing with Camille now, one hand at her waist, their laughter too private to belong in public. Maya's pulse slowed to something cold, deliberate. She slipped her phone from her clutch and typed a single line in her notes app. Invisible. Confirmed. The night stretched long after that. A blur of speeches and clinking silverware, the city pulsing beneath them. But for Maya, the gala had already ended. Somewhere between the applause and the kiss of champagne on her tongue, she understood what would come next. Not confrontation, not yet. Something quieter, something more surgical. When the elevator doors closed on their reflection at the end of the night, Daniel chatting about stock options, her face turned toward the skyline. Maya caught her own eyes in the mirrored steel. For the first time, she didn't see a woman erased. She saw the outline of someone about to disappear on her own terms. Morning came in grayscale. The light through Maya's window was thin and undecided, neither warm nor cold, just honest. Daniel had already left for work, the faint trace of his cologne hanging in the kitchen like a signature. The apartment, once styled in the language of couples, matching mugs, coordinated throw pillows, felt now like a showroom of absence. She poured coffee into a chipped mug she'd owned before marriage, the one he'd once teased her about keeping. It fit her hand perfectly. She opened her laptop at the dining table, the one they'd bought after their first promotion, and began her quiet inventory. No spreadsheets today, no dashboards or bright-colored graphs, just the slow, deliberate excavation of a truth she'd ignored for too long. Her notebooks were lined up like witnesses, leather-bound, scuffed, each filled with her neat, looping handwriting. Dates, meeting notes, fragments of code, margin thoughts written in pencil. She turned to an entry from 6 months ago, June 3rd. Camille requests access to data layer, says for marketing forecast, but context missing. Another line beneath it, Daniel says don't overthink workplace politics. The word politics had felt benign then. Now it read like camouflage. She opened Slack logs she'd exported to her private drive, threads of polite disagreement, her messages about inflated ad impression metrics, about the way Helix North's system auto-generated phantom views when certain tags looped. She had warned them. It's misleading, she'd written. We're selling ghosts to advertisers. The replies were gentle, managerial. Let's revisit this next quarter. Appreciate your passion for integrity. Each message, when read alone, sounded harmless. Together they formed a pattern of delay, dilution, dismissal. Maya's pulse slowed as she scrolled. Somewhere between the data and the silence, she could see the shape of what she had become. The employee who keeps the machine honest until the machine decides honesty is inefficient. By afternoon, her dining table was covered in evidence. A scatter of printouts, sticky notes, USB drives. It looked like a crime scene only she could interpret. She opened a fresh document titled Log of Omissions. Into it, she began typing. Cold, factual, dated. No anger, no flourish. Just the record of vanishing accountability. Hours passed unnoticed. When the shadows lengthened across the table, she realized she hadn't eaten. She reached for her journal, the one with the maroon cover Daniel had given her on their 2nd anniversary. He'd written inside, "For your thoughts, brilliant or quiet." She opened to a blank page and began to write. Not about data, but about the other ledger she had been keeping subconsciously. Her marriage. Parallel systems, she wrote. One built on numbers, one on gestures. Both optimized for appearance. She listed the small betrayals, the late nights at the firm, the shifting pronouns when he spoke about the future, the way he praised her only when it reflected on him. Each memory landed with the clarity of a statistic confirmed. Marriage thinning to PR, she scribbled in the margin. Company sanding off ethics to shine. The air in the apartment thickened. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a siren flared and faded. She leaned back in her chair, pen resting against her knuckle, and realized she was no longer angry, just lucid. Anger had edges, but this was smooth, expansive, almost clinical, the kind of clarity that precedes action. Before bed, she gathered her notes into a folder and labeled it simply, Integrity. Then she backed up the files, encrypted them, and placed a printed copy in the drawer with their marriage license. 2 forms of contract, 2 systems of belief, both broken in their own elegant way. When she finally turned off the light, the apartment felt quieter than it had the night before. Not empty. Prepared. The resignation email took her less than a minute to write. 2 sentences, stripped of everything decorative. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position at Helix North, wishing the team continued success. She didn't even bother with her signature banner, the neat digital rectangle bearing her title, phone number, and the illusion of belonging. She clicked send and watched the message slide into the company's server, swallowed by silence. No fireworks, no confrontation, just the soft punctuation of departure. Outside, the city was already awake, its hum like a current beneath her decision. She moved methodically, as if following an unspoken protocol. First, deactivating LinkedIn, then Instagram, then the work Slack account that still bore her muted smile in the corner. Each deletion felt like unhooking a thread from her own body. When she reached the last platform, her personal Twitter, the one she'd used to quietly share articles about ethics in tech, she hovered a moment, then clicked deactivate. The screen went blank, the timeline gone. It felt less like disappearance and more like cleaning a wound. By noon, her apartment was half-packed. She'd rented a small studio in Brooklyn, 1 floor up from a laundromat that smelled perpetually of detergent and steam. No concierge, no skyline view, just a single window facing a brick wall and enough space for a desk, a bed, and her laptop. She carried boxes herself, ignoring Daniel's unanswered texts that oscillated between confusion and charm. Can we talk? Are you upset about the gala? You're overreacting. She didn't reply. Instead, she sat on the floor of the new apartment amid cardboard and quiet, eating takeout noodles straight from the container. The air tasted of plaster and beginning. That night, she opened the folder labeled Integrity, the one she had assembled like a slow confession, and sent it through an encrypted channel to an independent counsel specializing in tech whistleblowing. The act was unceremonious, almost calm. She attached no cover letter, only a timestamp and her initials. Then she closed the laptop and waited for the wait to arrive. It didn't. Days passed without drama. No furious calls from Helix North. No desperate pleas to return. The company's feed continued posting awards, partnerships, smiling faces under perfect lighting. The world, it seemed, could spin just fine without her name in it. But inside the firm's gleaming glass offices, the machinery began to stutter. Her inbox, still active on the company server, started filling with questions forwarded from panicked departments. Where did Maya store the raw logs? Which version of the forecast script did she deploy? Can anyone access the validation keys? Each question revealed a dependency they had refused to see. The systems she'd built, efficient, ethical, invisible, had been running like an unseen skeleton. Without her, the bones gave way. At a cafe near her new building, Maya read the headlines on her phone without logging in. A tech blog speculated about Helix North's sudden delay in quarterly reporting. Investors murmured about data restructuring. Her former manager had posted a team photo captioned, "We're stronger than ever." She almost laughed at the symmetry. How often people mistook denial for resilience. In the evenings, she walked the narrow Brooklyn streets, the kind lined with small bookstores and cats watching from windowsills. No one knew her name here. No one expected her to smile at a gala or smooth over a scandal. She passed couples arguing softly under streetlights, a man tuning a guitar on his stoop, the smell of bread from the corner bakery. The ordinary world, messy, human, unfiltered, felt like oxygen. Back in her studio, she sat by the window, laptop closed, listening to the rumble of the subway beneath the floorboards. She thought of Daniel, of Camille, of the applause that had swallowed her name. They would keep spinning their stories for a while longer, trying to fill the space she'd left with noise. But noise couldn't substitute structure. When the first message from the council arrived, a short acknowledgement, professional and discreet, Maya felt no triumph, only steadiness. She wasn't disappearing to punish them. She was reclaiming the version of herself that didn't need to be seen to matter. The city moved outside her window like a slow tide. She finished her tea, turned off the light, and let the dark hold her, no longer invisible, simply unseen by choice. It began with the dashboards. The morning Maya's resignation became internal gossip. The analytics suite at Helix North froze mid-refresh, lines of code looping in silent protest. The growth graph that once slanted upward now pulsed red at the corners, an error message that refused to vanish. By noon, engineers were slumped over monitors, tracing broken pipelines they barely understood. The system worked fine as long as Maya was invisible. It began to bleed the moment she wasn't. In the glass conference rooms overlooking the Hudson, the mood shifted from celebration to containment. Camille Rhodes moved through the floor like a conductor trying to manage an orchestra that had forgotten the melody. Her lipstick stayed immaculate, her voice calibrated to calm, but her eyes betrayed the strain of holding chaos behind a corporate smile. "Let's not panic," she told the executive team. "We'll frame this as a maintenance update, nothing more." But the numbers didn't listen. Clients began calling, politely at first. "We're noticing discrepancies in the impression reports." Then, less politely, "Why are we paying for metrics your system can't verify?" Screenshots circulated in email threads marked urgent. The whispers traveled fast. Something in Helix North's data fabric was rotten, and regulators were sniffing the air. The first investor call after Maya's departure was meant to reassure. Instead, it thinned the room of confidence. Camille watched the CFO stumble through questions about validation protocols, his voice a shade too brittle. "Our audit confirms data integrity," he insisted. But somewhere in the chain, a voice interrupted. "Then why did your lead data scientist quit without notice?" The line went silent. After the call, Camille shut herself in her office, the skyline reflected in the glass like an accusation. On her desk lay a folder she hadn't wanted to open. Maya's archived Slack threads, unearthed by IT as part of their internal review. She scrolled through them, one message at a time. Polite warnings, timestamps, attachments. Each note was surgical, calm, damning. Inflation in ad impression loops exceeds margin of error. Auto-generated views misclassified as human traffic. Potential FTC violation if uncorrected. Camille's throat tightened. These weren't the words of a disgruntled employee. They were the paper trail of someone who had tried to save the company from itself. And now, in the void of her absence, those cautions read like prophecy. She forwarded the thread to the CEO with a sanitized summary. "There may be legacy issues in our data infrastructure." She avoided naming Maya directly, but everyone knew. Helix North's walls seemed to hum with her ghost, her code, her logic, her quiet moral architecture. By the end of the week, an email arrived from legal. The Federal Trade Commission has requested preliminary information regarding ad verification claims. The subject line was a simple inquiry. The implication was a blade. Investor meetings were canceled. Journalists began to circle. Camille's containment plan unraveled in real time. Every statement she drafted sounded false against the clarity of Maya's archived words. The crisis deck she prepared, a sleek PowerPoint titled Transparency in Transition, looked like theater beside the raw evidence in Maya's folder. At midnight, alone in the office, Camille opened one of Maya's final emails. It had been sent to her directly, 6 weeks before the gala. Camille, I know marketing needs clean numbers, but they should also be true ones. We can't keep optimizing for illusion. Maya, the tone was not accusatory, just weary. Camille stared at it until the words blurred. Outside, the city glimmered like data points she could no longer control. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerously close to remorse. In the days that followed, Helix North held emergency meetings, hired consultants, issued statements heavy with corporate apology. But the fracture ran deeper than the press could see. It wasn't just technical. It was moral. And it had a name. And while the firm scrambled to patch what was broken, Maya's absence remained the quiet center of the storm, a shape defined not by noise but by everything collapsing around it. Daniel showed up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, knocking in that familiar rhythm, 2 short, 1 long, as if muscle memory might grant him access to the life he'd already forfeited. Maya didn't move at first. The kettle on her stove had just begun to hum. She let it. The sound filled the small Brooklyn studio with a kind of fragile authority. When she finally opened the door, he stood there in his tailored overcoat, the city wind behind him, eyes tired in a way that made him look younger and guiltier at once. "Maya," he said, a little breathless, "I just want to talk." She stepped aside. The gesture wasn't forgiveness. It was curiosity. He walked in, taking in the bare walls, the small desk by the window, the folded blanket on the bed. The room carried no trace of their old life. No framed wedding photos, no sleek furniture that demanded admiration. It was as if she'd scrubbed her existence back to its raw data. "Nice place," he said automatically, his voice searching for casual ground. "It's enough," she replied, pouring tea into 2 chipped mugs. One for him, one for the silence. They sat across from each other at the narrow table, steam drifting between them like a living thing. Daniel's fingers fidgeted on the rim of his cup, the same way they did during client negotiations when he was buying time to reshape the truth. "I didn't know it was that bad," he began. "At work, I mean. With Camille. I thought you were resilient," she finished for him, tone even. He winced. "I thought you were okay." Maya watched him, not unkindly. "You never asked." The words landed gently, without accusation, which made them sharper. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Things got complicated. Camille, she was ambitious, reckless maybe, but it wasn't personal," she said. "It was exactly that." The kettle hissed again, a late echo. In the pause, memories unfurled like old film reels. Daniel late for dinner because a client emergency had extended into drinks, her waiting with plates cooling in candlelight. His birthday toast 2 years ago, thanking her for keeping the home stable while he built their future. The evening she'd been offered a leadership role, her dream project, only to hear him say, "Maybe next quarter, when things calm down for us." Things never did. She remembered their fights, muted and intellectual. He would say, "You're taking this too personally," and she would reply, "I'm the person in it, Daniel." Their marriage had become a calendar of negotiations. Her weekends traded for his deadlines, her voice lowered for his comfort. Love turned into logistics. Now, sitting across from him, she felt the same tired calculus stirring, the reflex to interpret, to soothe, to make him feel less monstrous for choices he'd made freely. But she stopped herself. Listening didn't mean rescuing. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said finally, voice small. "Not just for what you think, for everything. The distance, the blindness." Maya looked out the window. The street below was alive with ordinary noise, buses braking, someone's dog barking, a teenager laughing into a phone. She envied their unself-consciousness. "You were never blind," she said quietly. "You just preferred not to see." Daniel looked as if he wanted to argue, then didn't. He sat back, shoulders folding inward. "They're saying at the firm there might be an inquiry," he murmured. "Camille's out. The company's in chaos. Everyone's asking how it happened." Maya traced a circle on the table with her fingertip, feeling the rough grain of the wood. "Systems collapse when they're built on silence. You and I just happened to test it first." He looked at her then, really looked, as if trying to recognize the woman who once built their mornings around, shared coffee, and half-slept jokes. But she wasn't there. She had left that version of herself behind with the login credentials and the wedding china. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just miss you." Maya almost smiled. "You miss the idea of me," she corrected softly. "The quiet version who made things easy." He swallowed, nodded once and set the mug down with care. "You're right." When he left, she didn't watch from the window. She simply gathered the empty cups, washed them slowly, and returned them to the shelf. The afternoon light shifted across the wall, breaking into narrow stripes. For the first time in years, she felt no need to explain her life to anyone, not even to herself. It wasn't closure she'd found, but clarity. The realization that what she'd called compromise had been erosion, and that recovery, for her, meant not rebuilding the marriage, but auditing the part of her that kept accepting less in the name of love. The story broke on a Wednesday morning, buried halfway down the homepage of the Wall Street Ledger, a small headline that grew teeth by noon. "Ad tech darling under scrutiny for data integrity violations." The piece was careful, all alleged irregularities and preliminary findings, but anyone who'd ever worked inside Helix North could read between the lines. Someone had finally noticed the ghosts in the numbers. By evening, it was everywhere. Business podcasts, tech newsletters, even late-night talk shows that treated corporate scandal like sport. Screens filled with the same looping image, Helix North's glittering logo flickering behind bold text that read, "Regulatory Inquiry, FTC confirms review." The city loved its morality plays, and this one had perfect casting, an ambitious PR executive, a vanished data scientist, a company built on illusion. Maya watched it unfold from the corner of a cafe, the muted television reflecting off her teacup. Camille's photo flashed across the screen, poised, immaculate, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. The caption below, "Rhodes steps down amid allegations of oversight failures." Maya felt no thrill, no vindication, just an odd, hollow ache, like watching someone drown in a river you'd already escaped. Her phone buzzed, messages from old colleagues, half apology, half curiosity. "Did you see the news?" You were right. They're saying compliance found your reports. You could come back, you know. She silenced the notifications, slid the phone face down on the table, and stared at the rain blurring the city outside. Returning would mean stepping back into the performance, the politics of contrition, the staged redemption arc. She was done being a narrative device for other people's guilt. Across town, Daniel was learning his own version of exposure. His firm, once proud of its proximity to Helix North's deals, released a vague statement about temporary reassignment pending review. The phrase was corporate for exile. His clients stopped returning calls. Partners avoided eye contact in hallways. Even those who didn't know the details sensed the scent of contamination. His name had become a liability, proof of connection in a city that traded reputation like currency. That night, the two stories, the corporate one and the personal one, intersected only in silence. Daniel sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through the article, recognizing fragments of Maya's language embedded in the inquiry summary. Words like misrepresentation, ethical threshold, systemic negligence. He realized she'd never shouted, never sought revenge. She had simply told the truth, and truth had done what fury could not, dismantled the architecture of deceit from within. Camille issued a statement the next morning. "I take responsibility for procedural oversights," it read. "Helix North's vision remains one of transparency and trust." The irony was almost tender. The press devoured it, dissecting her phrasing, her outfit, her tone. The spectacle turned her confession into content, the way the city always did. By afternoon, think pieces debated the ethics of ambition and women in crisis leadership. Maya didn't read them. She had lived the footnotes already. Reporters tried to reach her. Emails with subject lines like, "exclusive perspective" and "your voice matters." She ignored them all. Her story didn't belong to the cycle of outrage. It was a quiet ledger of choices, of what she'd refused to become. Still, she couldn't fully escape the noise. In the grocery line, two strangers argued about the scandal. One said, "That whistleblower's probably cashing in somewhere." The other replied, "Or hiding." Maya smiled faintly, neither insulted nor recognized. They were both wrong. In the evenings, she took longer walks along the East River. The skyline glittered as it always had, indifferent to the collapses beneath it. The city rewarded those who performed their pain publicly. Apologies written for cameras, tears timed for trending clips. But Maya had chosen a quieter stage. Sometimes when she passed a newsstand, she caught a glimpse of herself reflected in the glass. Just another face among headlines, untagged, unclaimed. It comforted her. The world could keep its spectacle. She had her own kind of reckoning. Back in her studio, she opened her journal and wrote one line before bed. "When truth becomes entertainment, silence is resistance." Then she closed the notebook, turned off her phone, and let the city chatter without her. The email arrived on a Monday morning, its subject line deceptively polite. Helix North, an invitation to reconnect. Maya read it twice, the words careful and corporate, the tone almost repentant. The company's board, newly restructured and committed to rebuilding trust, was offering her a consulting position, title restored, stock options doubled, and the subtle flattery of redemption. They wanted the woman who vanished to return as the emblem of integrity. She closed her laptop and let the offer breathe in the room for a while. Outside, Brooklyn moved in its usual rhythm. Garbage trucks, children late for school, the coffee shop radio playing something soft and forgettable. She thought of those glossy offices uptown, the mirrored walls that had reflected her, disappearance without noticing it. She imagined stepping back into that building, the polite applause, the emails praising her courage while reattaching her to the same machine. No. She had no interest in being anyone's moral mascot. Instead, she spent her mornings working as an independent analyst for a small investigative newsroom, quiet work that paid little but meant something. They were building a series on algorithmic bias and privacy exploitation, and her role was to map the invisible scaffolding of tech's ethical blind spots. In the afternoons, she volunteered for a nonprofit that taught teenagers how to guard their data, how to understand what consent meant in digital language. The world didn't need her to be a headline. It needed her precision. Helix North sent a second message, then a third. The language softened, the numbers rose. She replied once, briefly. I appreciate the offer, but I've chosen a different kind of work. I wish the company clarity. It was the kind of grace that ended conversations without starting new wounds. That evening, she opened a drawer in her desk and took out a sheet of thick paper, the good kind she used only for things she meant. She hadn't written Daniel in months. There had been the occasional message from him, fragments of guilt disguised as updates. I'm taking time off, I'm trying to be better. She never answered. But now, as the light faded over the brick wall outside her window, she felt the need for one last communication, not reconciliation, not revenge. Closure with a lowercase c. She began slowly, pen dragging like breath across the page. Daniel, I'm not writing to reopen anything. I'm writing because silence can start to feel like complicity, and I want to leave this story clean. You hurt me, less by what you did, more by how easily you lived with it. The ease frightened me, because I had learned to mirror it. I forgave too fast, deferred too easily, made my peace with half-truths because they were dressed as love. She paused, the words sitting heavy but steady. You once said we were a team. Maybe we were, but the game changed. I no longer believe love means endurance at any cost. There's a cost to pretending, and I'm done paying it. Whatever debt we owed each other, consider it settled. She signed her name, not the one attached to a company badge, but the one that still felt human. Then she folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in an envelope without an address. She didn't need to send it. The act of writing was enough. Release didn't require delivery. Later, as she walked home from the print shop where she'd picked up some research materials, she passed a billboard advertising Helix North's new campaign. Transparency, reimagined. The tagline was almost cruel in its irony. She stopped for a moment, looking up at the polished slogan glinting against the dusk. The image showed a young woman standing before a glowing cityscape, confident, certain, visible. Maya smiled faintly. She had no need to be their symbol of visibility. Real transparency, she'd learned, was not about being seen. It was about being known to yourself. Back in her apartment, she pinned the unsigned letter to her corkboard between two quotes she loved. One from Baldwin, one from a forgotten philosopher. Beneath them, she wrote her own. Boundaries are not walls. They're the architecture of self-respect. Then she turned off the lights, letting the city outside shimmer through the blinds, and felt, for the first time, not invisible, not exposed, but exactly present. By spring, the city had softened. The wind no longer bit at the edges of buildings. Tulips were forcing their way through planters on the sidewalks. stubborn in their small resurrection. News of Helix North had faded to the business section. Short paragraphs about restructuring, layoffs, strategic recalibration. The company hadn't collapsed. It had merely shrunk into humility, trading spectacle for survival. Somewhere, Camille was consulting in silence. Daniel, according to the one mutual friend they still shared, had taken a sabbatical. Therapy, volunteer work, maybe both. He was learning repair in slow motion, without her. Maya's life had settled into a rhythm of modest clarity. She taught a weekly evening seminar at a local university, Data Ethics and the Human Cost of Systems. The class was small. Engineers, journalists, a few idealistic graduate students who still believed in reform from within. They sat in a circle, laptops closed, talking about accountability as if it were something that could be coded back into the world. Maya's voice carried not authority, but calm conviction. When she spoke of transparency, she no longer meant dashboards or compliance forms. She meant the courage of self-recognition. After class, she often lingered to talk with students who stayed behind. One night, a young woman asked, "Do you ever regret leaving? You could have fixed it from the inside." Maya smiled faintly. "Some systems can't be fixed from the inside," she said. "You just make sure the next one starts cleaner." The student nodded, her expression thoughtful, grateful. That was enough. Her walk home was a ritual of quiet observation. She passed bodegas spilling yellow light onto cracked sidewalks, their fruit stands gleaming under buzzing bulbs. Stray cats darted between parked cars. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. She liked how ordinary it all felt. The cashier who called her professor, the old man who sold her flowers at a discount on Fridays, the teenager skateboarding past graffiti that read, "No algorithms for love." In her studio, the walls were still bare except for the corkboard. Notes, drafts, the unsent letter to Daniel, now slightly curled at the edges. She sometimes reread it, not out of nostalgia, but as a benchmark, a reminder of the line she had drawn and honored. The letter had become less a record of loss and more a measure of distance, how far she'd traveled from the woman who once mistook endurance for devotion. Her days were simple, the kind that left room for thought. She freelanced for a privacy nonprofit, reviewed papers for a journal, cooked slow meals. On weekends, she took the train to the coast, letting the Atlantic wind erase what the city carved into her. She no longer needed to prove presence through productivity. The proof was quieter now. The plants thriving on her windowsill, the steady weight of a well-used notebook, the occasional laughter that arrived without warning. Once, while buying coffee, she saw her reflection in the cafe's glass. Hair pulled back, eyes unguarded, a softness she hadn't recognized in years. No applause, no spotlight. Just the steady realization of being here, holy. The kind of visibility no company could grant or revoke. That night, as rain pressed gently against the windowpane, she sat by her desk and opened her journal. The page waited without judgment. She wrote, "Presence is not the opposite of absence. It's what remains when you stop asking to be seen." Outside, a siren faded into distance, leaving only the hum of the city's pulse. Maya closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle, not as erasure, but as belonging. For the first time, she wasn't vanishing or performing. She was simply here, seen by the one witness who mattered most, herself.